This is the GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 195 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Mike Lizotte of American Meadows about Reduce Your Lawn Day and planting mini meadows. The plant profile is on Hosta, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events and this week's garden tasks in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on Cultivating Comfort from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Mike Lizotte Jr. He is known as the Seed Man, and he is co-owner of American Meadows. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Kathy. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you on. So we're going to talk all about mini meadows, reducing your lawn, different strategies for that. But before we dive into all of that, Mike, we're going to talk about baby Mike, and we're going to say, were you born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb?
That's a great question, Kathy. I think the initial answer would be no. And if you'd like me to elaborate further, I'd be more than happy to do so.
Definitely. So I take it you were not born into a family of gardeners or didn't grow up gardening?
I was not born into a family of gardeners, but I was, I guess, early in my life, was exposed to it. And that's kind of how my journey actually began in the gardening industry at the age of 13 years old when I went in to at the time was the Vermont Wildflower Farm, which became American Meadows, and they needed some help on the weekends packing some seed, and it kind of started there. And a funny story quickly, Kathy, about that is that people always ask me, how, just like you're asking me, how did I get into flowers and meadows and stuff? And the way I learned meadows and flowers is opposite of how most people do, where you might take a field guide and you'll go out into a meadow and you'll say, hey, that's what that looks like. That's a daisy and that's a lupin, whatever the case might be. I actually learned the total opposite, where when I was packing seed, I learned flowers from the seed first. And you could put 100 varieties of flowers on a table, and I could tell you which everyone was from seed form. But at the age of 13, I had no idea what it looked like from a flowers, because at the age of 13, I wasn't exactly into flowers at the time. And so it's kind of a funny story. So then I would go out and I say, oh, that's what a daisy looks like, or that's what a poppy looks like, or that's what a, monarda looks like. I knew what it looked like from seed, but I had no idea what it looked like from flowers. And so that's kind of where I started there. And then the owners are founders of the company, Ray and his wife, Charlotte Allen. They were extremely influential in my life and my career, as far as, again, being this teenager and seeing how hard they worked, how passionate they were about gardening and flowers. And then also early on, when I was working in retail, again as a teenager, when I was giving people advice about installing a meadow, putting in flowers, when they would come back to me or call me up and say, Mike, I just wanted to thank you for giving me this advice and information. My flowers turned out fantastic. We really enjoyed them. Something clicked early on that was really powerful for me, where I guess I didn't really had thought about it when I was young, the connection that gardening and flowers made, and how powerful it was for people, and that connection, it was really inspiring and eye-opening to me. I was like, wow, I never thought flowers would make put a smile on somebody's face, and they would be so connected to nature and gardening and the environment. And so early on, that was really powerful for me, and it stuck. And I was like, wow, this is actually really fun and powerful. And oh, and by the way, you can actually make a living, selling seeds and in being in the gardening industry. And this is back in the mid early 90s, and I guess Kathy, the rest is kind of history from there. Um, so those were the kind of the early days
Mm,
of my my early um, instances and experiences
mm-hmm,
in the industry, and then I guess through high school, through college, I must have been doing something right, and I continued to work for American Meadows, and I think it was in the early 2000s. The company really took off when we went on the internet. American Meadows was one of the first gardening companies to sell their product online, and the founders Ray and Shai got to a point where the business really took off, and they wanted to retire, and they gave me the first opportunity to try to purchase the company, which was in the fall of 2007, and that's when I reached out to my friend and business partner Ethan Platt. We began the business plan, and we became owners of American Meadows on January 1st of 2009. There was six of us at the time, and now 15 years later, we have over 100 employees. We own and operate two other gardening companies, and we have distribution and fulfillment in Vermont, in Missouri, and in Utah. So it's been quite a ride.
mm. I didn't realize you had those other distribution locations across the U.S.
Yes, we do with the diversity of offerings, as you
Mm-hmm,
know, not only seed, but we do bulbs, both tender and hardy bulbs, and then our plant material that we do anything from bare root to a 4.5 inch pot. Vermont can be sometimes challenging when it comes to live plants, given our geographical location. So we've distributed our plant material in a more suitable climate because
mm-hmm,
being a national company, we begin shipping early in the spring, early March usually, and it would be challenging to do that here in Vermont. So we've found we always are looking for a place more centrally located, I guess. So
hmm. And so for our overseas listeners, our non-USA listeners, does that mean they can't purchase from you, Mike?
they can purchase seed. We have and continue to ship our seed literally all over the world.
Hmm.
But plant material, given USDA regulations and phytosanitary um, challenges, most of our plant material and bulbs can only be sold in the United States.
Oh, good to know. So let's talk a little bit about Vermont, where your headquarters is based, and I assume you live nearby to your work. So for those outside the United States or not familiar with Vermont's climate, growing conditions, soils, can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I do live. So our corporate office is in Shelburne, Vermont. We've been there now for I think 5 or 6 years. In Shelburne, Vermont is located in the northeast part of the state of Vermont. We're right on Lake Champlain. We're about 40 minutes from the Canadian border. We're about 3 hours from Boston. We're about 4.5 hours from New York City. Having Lake Champlain, which I believe is the sixth largest lake in the country. Don't hold me to that, but we do tend to stay a little bit milder. But we are, I believe, here in a zone 4B, could be a zone 5. So short growing season in historically cold winters. And cold winters are freezing, below 0 feet of snow during winter, and a growing season that'll run usually, if you're direct sowing, is going to be from mid-May, until September, October, and by then we can have some pretty heavy frosts. Um, Soil conditions can vary, from shale if you're, in rock if you're in some of the mountainous areas. And where I live, I have a lot of sand. I actually live in an area called Sand Hill, and very sandy, well drained, not overly great soil. That said, in my gardening practices, whether it's my mini meadow or my vegetable garden or my perennials or my bulbs, I'm my philosophy, I'm not really amending my soil actually too much. I'm using what Mother Nature gives me, and in most cases, it's more than efficient for my gardening endeavors.
Excellent. Yeah, I always think of Vermont as a very rocky state.
Yeah, it's not. It's actually, Kathy. It's not that bad. We have mountains. We've got peaks here. Our tallest peak, Mount Mansfield, Camel's Hump. Those are above 4,000 feet in elevation, 4,500, something like that. But I think we have a lot of pockets. Being a smaller state, it can vary tremendously depending on where you are. But I would say
Mhm.
it's not overly rocky. Farming is a big industry here in Vermont. So certainly fertile grounds when it comes to farming and agriculture, dairy and corn are some big industries here. Obviously, I think we're aware maple syrup is pretty big. We have the best maple syrup in the country and maybe in the world, but so that's pretty big. But I think the biggest hurdle when it comes to gardening is just having a short season.
Mm.
And lots of people, especially if you're into veggies, there will be a lot of people who will start things such as tomatoes and peppers. You really have to start them indoors ahead, or else it can be challenging for that to even come to fruit and fruition, given our short growing season if you're going to direct sow. So I think that is always the biggest challenge. I think, Kathy, being in the industry, obviously, and talking to customers every single day, I'm always jealous, when we get to the February March timeframe and I'm talking to someone from the south and they're already getting ready to plant, knowing that I still have another 2 months. So I think that can be the biggest challenge here. But still, if you pay attention and you do it right, you can still really benefit and be very successful in your gardening endeavors. Just got to pay attention to some of the details like the frost dates and things like that.
And what are you growing for yourself in your home garden?
Sure, it's a great question. So I think you're aware, and obviously wildflowers and meadows are near and dear to my heart. So I have about a 2,000 square foot mini meadow, which is about a third of my lawn. So that is kind of I'd say the centerpiece. And then I do a number of hardy bulb plantings. Like I'll do about 2,000 tulip bulbs in a couple different areas, which are in full bloom right now, which are spectacular. So I have those. I have a couple what I would guess would be formal perennial gardens that I kind of dabble in. Not my specialty. Some of them were kind of here at the house that my wife and I purchased about 10 years ago. And then I have about a 700 square foot vegetable garden, which I have slowly been converting into more tender flowers such as dahlias and glads. And if I'm being honest, I'm starting to get this like dahlia itch where, the colors and different types of breeding colors, I'm starting to find that addicting. And so this
Mm.
year, I'm doing less vegetables and actually going to do more dahlias because I'm really getting hooked on them. So,
I could definitely relate because I started a cutting garden in my vegetable plot in my community garden, and it's now taken about 50% of my plot. So it's definitely shoving out some of the vegetables and edibles for those dahlias.
I'm moving in the same direction, Kathy.
So let's talk about you wrote a book on mini meadows, and the official title is Mini Meadows Grow a Little Patch of Colorful Flowers Anywhere Around Your Yard.
Yes, it was a fun project. I think it started back, geez, I think it was in 2017 or 2018. I was actually at a GardenComm event, which you're well aware of, and I started talking with one of the publishers from Storey Publishing, and she had come by our booth, and we started talking, and she was like, "Man, you have a really interesting story in the industry, and have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "No, not really." And she said, "I think you might have something here." And by the time she was flying back early back to the East Coast, and by the time I was packing up, she had sent me an email. She had pitched her boss and said, "Hey, I think we want you to write a little script here." And I did. And next thing you know, we're writing a book, and Rob Cardillo was coming up and doing all the photography. And yeah, it was a fun project. Lots of obviously anytime I can share now, geez, 35 years of knowledge in customer interactions with people, and get them inspired to do some gardening and hopefully get them hooked on gardening. I think it's a win-win, but it was a really fun project to work on.
Yeah, and for those listeners who are not familiar with GardenComm or my mentions of it in past episodes, GardenComm is the former Garden Writers Association, and now it's open to all garden communicators, and you can just find out about that at gardencom.org, and that's how Mike and I originally connected. And you are so lucky, Mike, to have Rob Cardillo be your photographer for your book, because he is, I think, if not the best, one of the best plant and garden photographers around.
I couldn't agree more. It was such a great experience, and it's funny you bring him up because obviously I known Rob through GardenCom, and knew his resume and how well respected he was. But I think at the time I don't think I'd actually met him. And I remember when he was driving up from Philadelphia and he was going to be up for the weekend to do a bunch of shooting and photography. I was so nervous. And, I had worked with some photographers before that weren't super pleasant to work with,
Mm.
very picky. And Rob shows up and he's kind of walking around. And of course, when you're taking these meadow shots, you really have to, it's all about light, right? And it's like the middle of the day. So we're just kind of walking around. He's like, yeah, I think we're going to wait for a little bit. And I was so nervous, and Rob was such a great guy, so nice, and just watching him was so inspiring, but just a great guy, and we're having dinner, and it was just so much fun. But his eye, and Kathy, I never written a book before, and you're writing the book, and you just have pages and pages, and it's fun, but I'm like, oh, it's here we go, it's 300 pages of a Word doc. It's hard to like, how is this really going to come to life? And I'll never forget when Carlene, who was my publisher at Storey, kind of sent me like this first like draft or first glimpse, which included Rob's photography. It was like I think I almost started crying. I was like, holy, this is just brought it to life, and it was just awesome. So yeah, Rob is obviously very well respected in the horticultural industry, but just he was a pleasure to work with.
I can imagine. And yeah, it's so satisfying seeing that project all come together and the pages and the layout. And you're like, wow, I did this.
Yeah, it really, because as you're writing for a few months, and it's just word pages and Word doc, and I'd be checking in with Carlene. Oh, Mike, how's it going? I don't know. I guess it's going good. I got 500 pages now, and it's just words, and then when you have the photography and they do some of the layout, and it's just wow. It really is that first glimpse is just it's inspiring.
So, listeners out there, I bet a lot of you have a book in you. So, go for it, is what I say. It's very satisfying experience.
Absolutely,
hmm
absolutely.
So, let's talk about Reduce Your Lawn Day, and then we'll get all into mini meadows and how to establish a meadow at your home, or replacing your lawn with a mini meadow is one of the options that we're promoting. But so I had written a book on ground covers. Ground Cover Revolution came out last year, and one of the ideas I had coming out of it was I would get approached by a lot of people asking about how to, like literally, how to take up the turf grass and then what to put in its place. And of course, I'm promoting ground covers with my book, but I would always say, well, there's other options. You could do a food garden, you could do a mini meadow. You could have that as your playground area. It could be hardscaped. It doesn't have to be turf grass necessarily in that spot. If you're only stepping on it to mow it, then it definitely doesn't need to be turf grass, is my theory. So I started to investigate if there was such a holiday as Reduce Your Lawn Day, and did a lot of research, didn't find one, then I thought maybe a good idea to partner up with somebody like a seed company like yours to get the word out on Reduce Your Lawn Day. And I think it's a natural fit. When I approached American Meadows, you guys were like, yes. And
Mhm.
I think it's a win-win for everyone. And we have it registered now with Chase Events. So it's now an official holiday every May 20th to take a look at your lawn areas and evaluate, does that need to be lawn? And then formulate a plan for maybe reducing some of that.
Well said, Kathy. Yes, we're excited, obviously partnering with you in kicking this off as the inaugural May 20th Reduce Your Lawn Day. But as you said, I think certainly in my experience, getting people involved in gardening, but also wanting to do something good for the environment.
Hmm.
People always ask or are asking me, what are consumers talking about, or when people call, what are they asking about and stuff. And I can tell you, Kathy, in my many years of doing this, the consumer right now has never been more in tune with the environment and wanting to do something good for the environment. And whether it's, as we talk about, um, reducing the lawn because lawns are a pain and the maintenance and all the pollutants that go into them and all that, to maybe doing a vegetable garden because they want to know where their food is coming from. There's
Hmm.
so many ways you can go about doing it, but wanting to do something good for the environment, whether it's maybe it's putting in a pollinator garden to support the pollinators or monarchs or whatever. But I can tell you the consumer's never been more in tune, and whether they're uh, an avid gardener or whether they've never gardened in their life. It's always fun and it's inspiring to get them excited and give them ideas and thoughts on how they could go about replacing a little piece of their lawn and creating something that's much more environmentally friendly and more inspiring and be more beneficial to them in some capacity.
In theory, it can be lower maintenance. Maybe a vegetable garden isn't lower maintenance than a lawn, but hopefully you're getting food and other benefits from it. And then, as you said, we can support the pollinators. We can have less inputs. Obviously, if you're regularly watering your lawn or maintaining it or fertilizing it with chemicals, then you can stop all those inputs.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So yeah, we're excited about it, Kathy, as you mentioned, with yourself. And I've continued to be pleasantly surprised the amount of people who have kind of come on board with this.
Hmm.
So many partners from Kids Gardening to, Bar Hill Gin to all the sponsors, Cobra Head and Run Amok and Dram and all these companies who have, come on board to support this. And we're really excited about it. I know here not only at our corporate office, but at my house. I'm going to be expanding my mini meadow, so I'll be taking out some more of my lawn, which is great. And so we're really excited to really embrace this. And so far as you and I are aware, it's been received with open arms and a lot of
Hmm.
excitement. So
Yeah, and I think our listeners, you can go to Reduce Your Lawn Day website, and you could take a pledge to reduce a portion of your lawn, and that gets you entered into prize drawing for some of those partners that we talked about. So you might get a Cobra Head tool, you might get some seeds out of it, but that's just basically our incentive to get people to sign up for that pledge, so we can say so many acres, could be 50 acres this year, could be 500 acres next year, of lawn was replaced. So we have some type of record in theory.
absolutely, yep, absolutely. We're excited. We're excited, Kathy.
Yep, and we're always looking for more partners. So anybody out there, come on board. Contact Mike or myself. And
Yes.
your staff has been wonderful to work with as well, Mike, just to let you know that.
Thank you. Yeah, I know Tabar. We were Tabar and Kendall and Hadley. We were all in the meeting prior to this, podcast and talking about it. And again, yeah, I mean the partner list you can see when you go to sign up. It's pretty intense. Lori Gardens and the Great Grow Along and so many great partners. And it's a great thing. And but this is something that we see every year, and it's continuous. And as I tell people, my goal is to always inspire them and set them up to succeed, whatever gardening endeavor they take on. And this is a great way to get involved and in hopes to get somebody hooked on gardening for a long time,
Hmm.
whatever it is, whatever they choose to do.
Yep. I always say that it could be, the little entryway drug, just taking a little bit off that lawn and go back. So we talk about on the website for Reduce Your Lawn Day and in my ground cover book, and I'm sure in Mini Meadows too, just doing a little bit at a time, not trying to do your entire lawn, right? That first year, that would be taking a lot on. If you could do it, great. If you have the resources and time and help to do so, but maybe just expanding your growing beds that you currently have out a bit, establishing one new bed this year, and then having a goal next year to expand a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Kathy, one of the things I'll get people will call and they're all gung ho because they did read an article about, reducing their lawn and they want to jump in. And it's always wanting them to set them up to succeed. And
Hmm.
sometimes, a lot of times, it's starting small. Get a little taste of it, be successful because let's say I'm talking to someone that does have acreage or they have multiple thousands of square feet. You might only start with 50 square feet, a little patch. Take on whatever it is you're going to do, be successful with it, and then you can always expand versus taking on too much. And then guess what happens? Life gets in the way. And all that weeding you thought you might be doing, or if you have to water, or whatever you thought you would do, it doesn't happen. And then they call back and they're disappointed. Mike, I was really bummed this gardening just didn't work out the way I wanted to because they bit off too much. Starting small, there's nothing wrong with that. And I can tell you, at least in my experience, when people do start small and they expand, they tend to have a little more of a successful journey, and they learn as they go and they build up that confidence and they're always, happy with their gardening experience. So, absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when you have a little bit and then it's a success, whether it just be a couple pots of herbs, and then you say, okay, now I'm going to put an herb garden in my sunny spot of my landscape
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
dig that out and then move on from there, is a great plan. And also, again, don't want to be overwhelmed with the maintenance and weeding and everything at once, but say you took up a lot of turf all at once and then you had some torrential rains that could cause an erosion issue.
Yep, absolutely.
So we want to have a plan before we begin and start to think about maybe where's our most sun, where's our part shade, where's our full shade, and appropriate seed mixes or plants to put in for those options. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think maybe our first thing to talk about, Mike, is when you're looking at your turf grass lawn, literally, how do you take it up is probably one of your first questions to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kathy, there are a number of ways that somebody could go about removing the turf of the lawn. And in my experience, they all seem to have their pros and cons. And a lot of it will come down to what is easiest for the consumer, the person, how big is it and what is the easiest, and they can range from using something like a rototiller to doing something with solarizing with black plastic. There are no till putting down plastics with topsoils. There's organic herbicides. So in all of these methods and are have pros and cons, and I'm not here to preach one is better than the other. To me, it always comes down to what's easiest for you and what might work best for yours, and understanding how long each of them may take. For instance, we have lots of customers who will use solarization, where they'll put some plastic down, which absorbs the sun and kind of burns what's underneath it to clear the soil. And that can be effective in instances, but it will take time. It can take months. And so if I'm planning, let's say I was going to put in a meadow in this case, and it was the spring, well, I might not put that meadow in for another year because I might take that 1 year to have to prep the soil that way. Versus if I was to use a tiller and do a shallow till, I could till and seed that all within an hour. And so there are a number of ways you can go about prepping. It really comes down to what might work best for you in the size of the area that you have, and then just having an understanding and making sure you take the time to prepare the area properly, getting rid of as much of the weeds and growth that are there. The better results your planting's usually going to yield both in the short and the long term. Because I do think, Kathy, in my experience, the biggest mistake people will make when they are, transitioning maybe a turf area to some type of gardening endeavor is they don't spend the time to prepare it properly.
Yeah, you get excited, you want to get to that next stage, but yeah, just like with all gardening, it starts with the soil and good
Yep,
preparation.
exactly, absolutely. I'm always telling people, in this process, that one area, that one step of preparing is the most critical. So when people are spending time, it's like spend the most time during that preparation phase, and you will be rewarded if you spend and take the time to do it right.
And I think a big part of that, of course, is your planning, checking out books like our books and others, and maybe some YouTube videos. And one method I wanted to ask you about, Mike, and see if you're seeing more of this being used is what's called a bee lawn or a pollinator lawn, where you're leaving some of the turf grass, but you're putting in plugs or seeding
Mhm.
in low flowering type meadow type plants. So you either do it by, aerating, going through and then like sprinkling in the seed and hoping that it catches on, or you're just encouraging some of those lower meadow flowering plants and not mowing as often.
Yeah, absolutely, Kathy. To answer your question, the answer is yes. Absolutely. Hearing people who may have read an article about it and will ask me about it, and absolutely is another way to just go about the establishment. And again, as you mentioned, whether it's plant material, which sometimes can be a little bit more expensive than seed, but again, can be a little bit quicker, can be a little more durable as far as establishing plugs into an existing turfed area where they'll be able to compete a little bit quicker, establish a little bit quicker than if you were going to seed. Those are just things to keep in mind when you're planning from a cost standpoint. But from an establishment standpoint, you can absolutely go about that. I am hearing people who may choose to go and use that method. Absolutely, Kathy. And again, there's so many different ways you can go about doing it, and one isn't better than the other, just kind of comes down to what you might feel most comfortable with. But again, as you mentioned, always having a plan in whatever option you may choose is just truly understanding the best and the right way to go about doing it and spend a little more time doing it the right way.
And I think part of that planning is looking at some of the seed mixes. So I remember getting your paper catalog. Of course, it's not now all online, and going
Yeah.
through and looking at your different seed mixes specifically for the East Coast, and for my region, the Mid Atlantic.
Hmm.
So those would be sometimes a mix of annual and perennial flowers for meadows, and different types of mixes for shade and part sun, part shade, or for full sun, optimally.
Yep, absolutely. As part of the planning process, as you know, Kathy is always choosing plant material or seeds that are going to thrive and do well in your particular growing region, or more specifically, sometimes your growing zone or zones. So yes, that's always important. And I think, as you're well aware, being an avid gardener, Kathy, when you're working with a reputable company, whether it's a seed company like American Meadows, or I'll give a shout out to another gardening company if you're buying plant material from someone like Bluestone Perennial, who happens to be one of my favorites. Making sure you're buying from a reputable company that can answer your questions, give you some suggestions, and make the recommendations, and making sure you are buying products that are going to thrive well in your geographical area or your zone. Always important. Absolutely.
It's that old principle of right plant, right place, and doing a little research, so you know that obviously it fits your growing zone and the conditions that you're going to be planting in.
Absolutely. And, as you mentioned, things such as how much sun is it getting? Is it shaded? What type of soil are you dealing with? Is it a loamy soil? Is it sandy? Is it rocky? Is it clay? Those are all things to take into consideration as part of that planning process to really make sure you're setting yourself up to succeed. I don't want, I hear a lot people when it gets, close to planting time, whether they buy from us or they run into a big box store and they just buy something that looks pretty, and unfortunately, when I ask them, it might not have been great for their zone, or it had already peaked its bloom time in the pot, and they wonder why it kind of died and never
Mhm.
set roots and things like that. So really important to those details as part of this planting process, is making sure you're choosing the right plant material or seeds that will thrive in your particular growing conditions.
Do you have a recommendation versus having a mixed planting, like a mixed seed of some annuals and perennials in it for establishing a meadow versus a monotype? So just say all coreopsis or
Mhm.
all black-eyed Susan meadow.
Sure. I think, Kathy, I have my own personal opinions, but a lot of it will just come down to what the customer who I might be speaking with might want, in giving them some tips and ideas. So, for instance, as it pertains to a meadow, I'm always, the more diversity, the better, for a number of reasons. Not only different life cycles with annuals and perennials, but having flowers that come into bloom at all different times. And those are some of the benefits of buying a mix from, say, American Meadows. We've formulated it not only potentially with annuals and perennials in it, which annuals bloom in the first year and then perennials bloom in the second and successive seasons, but we've also designed our mixes so you have things in bloom all season long, usually starting in late spring all the way until frost, kill the plants later in the season. So those are some things to be aware of. Because one of the biggest hiccups I think consumers will make, and whether they do a mix or whether they do something where, Mike, I just want a meadow or color of just oranges or reds or pinks or whatever it might be, is they end up choosing flowers or vegetation that blooms at around the same time. So they'll be like, Mike, I bought these six different varieties of perennial, or I had these six different varieties from seed, and they didn't realize that they all bloom, let's say midsummer, and they didn't have anything in bloom for the fall or late summer. So I'm always constantly educating and making sure that they're choosing plants that give them continuous color during the season, because a lot of times people don't realize it, and they'll come to me and they'll say, Mike, these are my favorite plants and the favorite colors. And I say, hey, this is great, but did you realize that they all bloom in July, and you don't have anything for later in the season, or you don't have anything for earlier in the season? So those, again, talking about this planning, is making sure that you're choosing plants or seed and varieties that are going to give you color to last all season long.
I think that's a great point, Mike. So you can have one flower coming in while another one's going out, and you can have those layers of color over time rather than that one big burst. Unless, of course, you're only in that home for those 2 weeks of the summer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something you want to be aware of, because I can tell you, I hear it all the time where, again, they may have chosen their plants themselves, or they didn't talk to someone who might have known a little more, and they're wondering like, hey, Mike, it was beautiful, just like you said, for 2 weeks, but that was it, and then there wasn't much there. What can I do? And that's where we get into recommending things that bloom at different periods of the season to give them that continuous color.
I think those are all great points. So, for those of us on the East Coast in particular with big old trees, and we love our trees, but it's kind of hard to have a little mini meadow or a prairie established because almost all the plants are sun loving ones.
Mhm.
Is there a shade mix or shade options that you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, anytime I'm talking to someone, Kathy, and let's say we're talking shade, is making sure you and I are on the same page as far as how are we defining shade. because that can vary tremendously. On our website, we're usually defining shade when it comes to our seed products of less than 4 hours of sun.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of defining as shade or partial shade. Now, as we may be aware or maybe not, is anytime you're dealing with seed, you're always going to need some sun in order for seed to germinate. So when I'm talking to someone and let's say they live in the woods or there's heavy canopy, seeds might not be the best option. And sometimes that conversation may be, hey, let's think about bare root or plant material because it's going to thrive or do a little bit better than trying to propagate from seed because you just don't have enough sunlight to be successful with a seed planting. And so, getting back to that, once we are on the same page as far as shade goes, plenty of things, as you're well aware, woodland wildflowers, if you were looking to establish things like trilliums and hepaticas and lobelia and things like that, would thrive very well in a wooded or shaded area. Then you get into more of the mainstream things like hostas and stilbes and Virginia bluebells and bleeding hearts and lamium, all of those things which we sell in plant form would all thrive well in a shady or semi-shady area. One of the things that we sell, Kathy, that you may or may not be aware of that are really, really popular is similar to our wildflower mixes, we've created these like pre-planned gardens
Hmm.
where we kind of they come with a map and we kind of create these like little small space gardens for you that come with a map and they come with X amount of plants. And it's a nice way. Those are really popular, especially for novice gardeners who may have never done it before. So it's kind of like a little kit and we lay it out for you. Most of them come with anywhere from 20 to 25 plants, so it's a good value. And we have a number of those, we call them like shade loving pre-planned gardens that can be, that are really nice and economical. And it's a great way if you've never done a garden before to get introduced to a lot of different types of plant and plant varieties.
Yeah, I think that's a great option, especially for heavily wooded areas or under deciduous trees, where you might have some open canopy in the spring to get those established, and then we'll be shaded in after that.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the biggest thing, Kathy, is don't get discouraged if you have shade. There's always something. You'll find something to grow. You may have to search a little further. Like as you know, sometimes you can't just go into the big box store and they're going to have a good selection of shade loving. You may have to, call a company like American Meadows or go to I like to say your local garden, reputable garden center, because you're probably not the only one in the area who might have shade, and hopefully they'll have some shade solutions. But don't get discouraged because it may take some time. It could be a little more expensive, especially if you have to buy plant material versus seed. But you can get some color. You can get some nice plants to grow in the shade.
Hmm. And the great thing, Mike, is turf grass lawns don't do well in the shade. So
Exactly.
you,
Exactly.
if you're been struggling and trying to establish a lawn in that type of situation, I would say this is your message to stop and think about what plants, ground covers, in particular, would do better in that location.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's talk about some of those challenges that gardeners have, such as deer. Do you have any deer proof or deer resistant mixes for a meadow or recommendations for individual plants that deer don't like in a meadow situation?
Sure, I get this question every day. And a lot of the times, being a national company, and even being here in Vermont, we have deer right outside my door here. And what's interesting, and it's really, Kathy, a case by case basis as far as there's plenty of deer present here in Vermont, but because it's relatively rural, there's lots of other vegetation that's more appealing.
Hmm.
So my mini meadow, the deer don't really nibble, they don't eat any of it. What they may end up doing sometimes is they may lay in it to
Hmm.
sleep at night. But for the most part, there's other vegetations, there's orchards and other things that tend to be more appealing. I always tell people like wildflowers, for the most part, they're not high on the menu list, but I have plenty of customers that live down in like the outskirts of like New York City, and there's an overpopulation of deer, but they don't have food sources like they do here in Vermont, and they will eat anything. Those can be some of the challenging situations because they lack a food source and they're eating everything to stay to for survival, and so we do offer some deer resistant wildflower mix offerings, and we do offer, again, getting back to these pre-planned gardens that we offer, we have some um, deer proof pre-planned gardens as well too. But again, before I am recommending plants when I'm talking to someone, I ask them the questions I just mentioned to you, like, because people are always like, there's deer. I say, okay, are the deer eating? Like, have you put out planters, or do you notice that they're eating the vegetation currently on your property? Because if they are, that tells me that that could be a challenge. And no matter what you put out there,
Hmm.
there's a good chance they're going to eat because clearly they lack a food source. Versus my situation, or people like, yeah, Mike, there's deer on the property, but they kind of just bop through and they don't really nibble on anything. That's usually a good sign that one of these deer resistant mixes or the deer proof, garden would probably work pretty well because they're not in such a situation that they're eating everything because they're starving. So I usually will ask some of those questions and then make the recommendations based off that.
How about the two water situations of one end would be drought tolerant, something that maybe you can't get a hose or sprinkler or water that area more than, for establishment. And then
Mhm.
the other end of the operation might be sitting in too wet, like a really wet
Yeah.
area of the landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've been talking about this whole podcast, Kathy, is this is part of that planning stage. What are the conditions that I'm thinking about planting in or removing this turf in? Does it tend to be dry? Is it an area that I don't have a water source to? Not that I want a water source, but does it tend to be very dry in those areas? Or does it tend to be, is it a wetland? Is it wet feed? Is it damp most of the time, regardless if I'm watering it or not? Those are things to take into consideration, and then making sure that you are buying plant material or sourcing seeds that will do well in those conditions. And certainly at American Meadows, we offer solutions for both. Things that do well in a dry, potentially sandy soils, things like gaillardias or cosmos or coreopsis, and then on the other spectrum, things that do well in wetlands, things like Joe Pye weeds or lobelia, making sure you've identified those type of growing conditions that you may have, and then choosing your plant material or your seeds accordingly based on those type of conditions. So as we talked about, getting back to the planning, that would be something that I would make a note of, saying, hey, Kathy, I'm looking for some plant material, and it tends to be somewhat of a damp, semi-shaded area. What would you recommend for that? So that is where, it's important to understand that.
Let's talk a little bit about maintenance in our last few minutes of this podcast.
Hmm.
And so I know establishment is going to not be instant. So let's talk a little bit about getting a meadow established and then what that future maintenance might look like.
Getting back to, you were talking about if we were to be sowing a wildflower mix, and let's say the mix has annuals and perennials. We haven't talked a ton about this, but always important too, of knowing the life cycle of the plant materials that you're planting, and whether it's seed or plants. Am I planting perennial material, or am I planting annual material, or is it a combination? Because that's going to really set you up for how your meadow is going to mature, the expectation first year, second year, and beyond. So always important to know what you're planting, understand those life cycles, because we do offer with all the different mixes. We may have a homeowner who calls and says, you know what, Mike, we're thinking about putting our house on the market, and we want to beautify it. And so we're really looking for a short term color. They may choose to do a meadow that's just annuals, and get quick color, because they're going to sell the property and they don't want to invest any further.
Mm-hmm.
They want quick color for that first year. Whereas someone else says, Mike, not only do I want some quick color, instant gratification, but I also want longevity and perennials. They may choose a mix of annual and perennial. So always good to know the life cycles because that's going to dictate how things are going to develop. First year color has to come from annuals from seed, then perennials from the second in the for the second and successive seasons from seed. And then so once you know that, and then your meadow, if you planted it at the end of the season, maintenance for a meadow is cutting it down once a year. And when you do that, Kathy, really depends on your preference. You can do it in the fall, you could do it in the spring. Why do you cut the meadow back? So let's say if you were planting along a tree line, if you were not to cut that, you would have natural succession occur and your saplings and trees would move in within a couple of years. So there's that, which is somewhat extreme, but there is that. But more importantly, we recommend cutting it down once a year because it does help disperse ripen seeds that the flowers produce at the end of the growing season. Now, again, whether you do it in the fall or spring would be up to you. I can tell you I cut my meadow in the following spring because I leave the seed heads in the plant stalks there through the winter to provide habitat for any nesting creatures that might come in. And then usually after I've had a couple of weeks of warm weather, above 50-degree weather here in Vermont, say early to mid-April, I'll go out there and I will cut back my meadow at that time.
Great advice. And I do know that some recommend doing a burn instead of a cutback. In
Hmm.
most areas, you know, especially in the Washington, D.C. area, you are not allowed to do a burn. And then, of course, there's the concern that it might get away from you.
Exactly. I think that burns can be efficient and effective. I don't personally, for the exact reason you just said, from a liability issue, I'm not recommending that on a day-to-day basis because God forbid if you were to burn your house down and come back to me and that wouldn't be good. So can it be beneficial? Can it work? Sure. But again, most of the time on the consumer side of things, again, whether getting the right permits or just not feeling comfortable recommending it, is kind of the case there. So
Good. I'm glad we addressed that because every once in a while somebody will ask me about it, and I'm like, I don't think it's such a good idea.
yeah, I mean, again, like you usually when I am recommending it, it's going to be to a commercial entity who's got the proper permits from the fire department. The fire department's going to be on standby, etc. So not overly applicable to the kind of the small consumer gardener, but it can be beneficial. And as you're well aware, Kathy, they do
Hmm.
have those controlled burns more so in the western part of the U.S. And they are effective. But for like you say, for your certainly your segment in the DC area, probably I'd recommend sticking with a weed whacking or some type of cutting down. So.
Hmm. So, how can our listeners contact you to find out more?
Sure. So certainly to check out American Meadows, AmericanMeadows.com. You can, as we've talked about during this podcast, not only learn about all the seed and the wildflower products and our perennials that we sell, but more importantly, you can learn about Reduce Your Lawn Day. We have a landing page there. You can learn all about it, support it. As you mentioned, Kathy, sign the pledge there. Me personally, Mike the Seed Man, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram as well too. I do weekly updates of my mini meadow and share tips and tricks all throughout the summer on my property as well. And also any speaking engagements and things like that. Usually I'll post up there and all that fun stuff. So.
Great. Yeah, I'm be looking forward to following how your meadow develops this summer and seeing that on your social media. And any final thoughts for listeners who have been thinking about doing a mini meadow to reduce their lawn and maybe thinking that their HOA or their neighbors or others might object to it?
Well, I think as we talked about in this, Kathy, is there's nothing wrong with starting small. planning is important. Really do the research and do the planning piece. Set yourself up to succeed. And I can guarantee if you do that planning and do the extra work during the preparation, use a good quality product, whether it's seed or buy good perennials. You're going to have fun. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to kill a few plants along the way, but that's okay too. But starting small and building up your confidence and knowing that you can do it and having success, you're going to be hooked for life. And I think you're really going to enjoy your gardening endeavor, whatever it is. But and it's a lot of fun, and hopefully we've inspired some people today to go out there and plant a meadow this year. So
I hope so too. Thank you, Mike.
Hosta plant profile. Hosta species, are known for their beautiful foliage that range from bright chartreuse greens to deep blue-green tones. Many hosta plants also have variegated foliage with creamy or white edging or patterns. Hosta are known as plantain lily and are native to Asia. In addition to their attractive foliage, hostas send up flower stalks of white or purple flowers in the summer that attracts various pollinators. Some varieties of hosta are particularly known for their honey-like flower fragrance. They do best in rich, humusy soils that are kept relatively moist but not waterlogged. Hostas prefer shady locations but can tolerate additional sun exposure with extra watering. Hostas die back to the ground over winter and leaf back out in the spring, so they pair well with early spring blooming bulbs like snowdrops or daffodils. Hostas are very low maintenance. To encourage more vigorous growth, sprinkle a slow-release fertilizer as they begin to grow in spring and mulch with an organic compost. If deer, vole, or rabbits are an issue, apply a repellent spray. If slugs or snails chew on the leaves, spread iron phosphate pellets or diatomaceous earth around the plants. Hostas can be miniature or dwarf-sized, with leaves just an inch or so wide, all the way up to selections that are several feet wide. There are common hostas that are fairly inexpensive and quite rare ones that could cost hundreds of dollars for a single division. The good thing about hosta is that you can start with just a few as they multiply in clumps and are easy to dig and divide to spread them about and form a dense ground cover in a matter of years. Hosta, you can grow that. This profile was excerpted from the book Groundcover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I was so pleased to see my Cornus Cusa wolf-eyes dogwood has finally bloomed after several years in my garden. That was such a welcome sight. Also blooming in my garden is the Japanese snowbell tree, Styrex japonicus, and that is covered in little white bell blooms that smell like honey. And that's a wonderful sight. Over at the community garden plot, our strawberries are starting to ripen. In the garden tips that we shared this week via our social media channels, we talked all about peonies. And one of those tips was not to bury your peony roots too deep, just an inch or so below the soil surface, because we don't want them to not bloom for you. Another tip was how to detect when a peony bud was ready for picking, and that is to feel it, and when it's no longer rock hard, when it's kind of like a marshmallow in texture when you squeeze it, that's the perfect time to cut it for cut flower use in a vase. In local gardening events, some upcoming ones that you might want to attend if you're in the greater Washington, D.C. area, include the tomato disease and other things that ooze in the garden talk on Friday, May 24th by the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia, and this takes place at 10 a.m. It's free, it's a webinar, and you can register for that link at mgnv.org. Then on May 25th, a Saturday, there are guided forest bathing walks at 9:30 a.m. at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens. There is a fee for this, and you must register in advance. Go to hillwoodmuseum.org. On that same day, May 25th, that's a Saturday, the Baltimore Herb Festival is taking place at Leakin Park, and that's from 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. Tickets are required. Go to baltimoreherbfestival.com. And then finally, on Tuesday, May 28th, the Trees of Ladew Walk is happening at 9:30 a.m. There is a fee, and you must register in advance. That takes place at Ladew Gardens in Monkton, Maryland, and you can find out more details at ladewgardens.com. Happy gardening!
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Groundcover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Groundcover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Groundcover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Groundcover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org. In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Teri Speight, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or Bookshop.org.
This is the last word on cultivating comfort in your garden with Christy Page at Food Gardening Network. This is an article by our gardening guru, Amanda MacArthur. In moments of stress or uncertainty, a magical remedy transcends time and space, comfort food. And what better way to indulge in its soothing embrace than by tending to your very own garden? Gardening isn't just a hobby, it's a journey of self-discovery, a therapeutic escape, and a source of pure joy. And when it comes to comfort food, vegetables reign supreme, offering a delightful blend of nourishment and nostalgia. So let's embark on an adventure with the top comfort food vegetables that you can cultivate in your garden, bringing a symphony of flavors and colors to your palate. White potatoes. Potatoes are the epitome of comfort, and luckily they're a cinch to grow. With their hardy nature, they thrive in well-drained soil and soak up the sunshine like champions. From russet to red to Yukon Gold, the potato kingdom offers a variety to suit every taste bud, allowing you to create your own potato paradise right in your backyard. Carrots, sweet, earthy, and oh so satisfying, carrots are a garden delight that even Bugs Bunny would approve of. These vibrant root vegetables thrive in loose, sandy soil and add a pop of color to your garden beds. Whether you munch on them raw as crunchy snacks or roast them to caramelize perfection, carrots bring a comfort touch to any dish. Plus, their radiant orange hue is a feast for the eyes, transforming your garden into a canvas of edible art. Tomatoes. Ah, the juicy, sun-ripened tomato. Is there anything more comforting? Whether nestled between two slices of bread and a classic BLT, or simmered into a rich marinara sauce, tomatoes elevate every dish they grace. Lucky for us, they're well-suited to home gardening, thriving with proper support and a healthy dose of sunlight. With each plump fruit that you pick from the vine, you're rewarded with a burst of flavor and a sense of pride in your green thumb prowess. Pumpkins. Ah, the iconic symbol of autumn, the humble pumpkin. Whether carved into jack-o'-lanterns or transformed into luscious pies, pumpkins are a beloved comfort food that captures the essence of the season. And lucky for us, they're also a joy to grow. With their sprawling vines and vibrant orange fruit, pumpkins add a touch of whimsy to any garden. Whether you're baking pumpkin bread, simmering a hearty soup, or indulging in a slice of pie, the sweet, earthy flavor of pumpkin is sure to warm your heart and soul. Corn. What's a summer barbecue without the sweet, juicy crunch of corn on the cob? Corn is the ultimate comfort food, evoking memories of picnics and backyard gatherings with loved ones. Growing corn in your garden is a rewarding experience with its tall stalks swaying in the breeze and golden ears bursting with sweetness. Whether grilled to perfection, steamed with butter, or tossed into salads, corn adds a touch of summer magic to any meal, reminding us of sunny days and carefree moments. Sweet potatoes. Move over regular potatoes, there's a sweeter, creamier sibling in town. Sweet potatoes are a beloved comfort food that's surprisingly easy to grow, thriving in warm, well-drained soil with a dash of sunshine. Whether baked into pies, mashed into casseroles, or simply roasted with a sprinkle of cinnamon, sweet potatoes bring a deliciously satisfying sweetness to any dish, making them a must-have in your garden repertoire. Peppers. Whether you're craving sweetness or a fiery kick, peppers have you covered. These colorful gems are a versatile addition to countless comfort food dishes, from stuffed bell peppers to spicy chili. And with their relatively low-maintenance nature, peppers are a gardener's dream, requiring plenty of sunshine and well-drained soil to flourish. So go ahead, spice up your garden and your life with these vibrant veggies. Cultivating a garden full of comfort vegetables isn't just about the harvest. It's about savoring the journey, connecting with nature, and nourishing both body and soul. Whether you're a seasoned gardener or a novice enthusiast, growing your own vegetables opens the door to a world of flavors, textures, and possibilities. This has been Christy Page with foodgardening.com. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to anchor.fm/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com. Thank you. Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to washingtongardener.blogspot.com. Thank you. You can find and follow Washington Gardener on Twitter /X, Instagram, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. Please take a moment to rate and review this podcast on Spotify and Apple. Open the Spotify or Apple app, search for GardenDC, check on the rate button, and select 5 stars.